Welcome back to the program. We are joined again by Marta Gavrышko, a Ukrainian historian and scholar of Holocaust studies and Ukrainian nationalism, currently working in the United States. So thank you for coming back on the program.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So recently we saw the Ukrainian state, led by Zelensky, giving full state honors to Andrei Melnik, and his remains were then, were repatriated and reburied in Ukraine. You have come out and criticized this very fiercely. I was wondering if you can give some context to what is actually happening because this is not the first instance of, I guess, let's call it whitewashing and paying tribute to quite dubious historical figures.
Yes, but this event is really turning point in national politics of memory in Ukraine. Why? For several reasons. First, Melnik belongs to Ukraine nationalist movement, and the cult of Ukraine nationalist movement belong first of all to Western Ukraine, where it was originated. And when Ukraine obtained independence in 1991, this glorious cult of freedom fighters, members of Ukraine Nationalist Underground and Ukraine Insurgent Army, UPAM, flourished and monuments appeared. And the members of these Ukraine Nationalist Underground, Bandera, Melnik, and Shukhevich, were celebrated as freedom fighters. But after Maidan Revolution, this cult steadily became more obvious in central Ukraine, let's say. But now, thanks to Zelensky, this cult became more and more obvious on the nation-state level. So I was surprised actually that the remains of Andriy Melnik, the leader of one of the fraction of OUN, was brought to Ukraine not by Yushchenko, President Yushchenko, who actually awarded the fascist leader Bandera the title of Hero of Ukraine, not by Poroshenko, who actually had this very nationalistic agenda as well and was instrumentalized in this history of nationalist movement for his political aims, but the Jewish president with Jewish origin, president who paid tribute to his grandfather, Simeon Zelensky, decorated war veteran who fought Nazis in the ranks of the Red Army, the president whose relatives were killed by Nazi collaborators. And now he's bringing Andriy Melnik, who was himself a Nazi collaborator, whose people, subordinates, collaborated with Nazis in the ranks of auxiliary police. It means that they were hunting Jews as a policeman, they guarded ghettos, then they convoyed Jews to the killing sites, and they participated in shootings of the Jews. And also Andriy Melnik was a proponent of creating a Waffen-SS division Galicia. The members of Waffen-SS division Galicia paid tribute to Hitler. They participated in in suppression of anti-Nazi partisan struggle in Slovakia and former Yugoslavia. So why the hell president with such a background, with such an ideology and worldview will bring this Nazi collaborator to Ukraine. And when I, Holocaust scholar, the scholar of Ukraine nationalist movement, a Jewish myself, a granddaughter of Polish woman, saw the president kneeling in front of the grave of Nazi collaborator, I was ashamed. I was furious. I couldn't understand why the discussion even happened. It wasn't organized, even public discussion. Do we need in democratic Ukraine such a national hero whose people participated in the killing of their Jewish neighbors? So I was really surprised why now and why it happened under Zelensky president. And the second reason, Zelensky as a comedian in his 1950s quartal, his entire career was built on making fun of Ukraine nationalism. When you see their sketches about Lviv and, Ukraine nationalists and their anti-Semitism and their chauvinism, they often made fun of all this. And now Zelensky is standing there with this, face and, pretend that he knows the history of Ukraine nationalist movement, very complex history, and all these war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by the members of Ukraine nationalist underground movement. Oh, give me a break. And I was so frustrated. But also what is very, very important, the silence of Ukraine historians and the silence of Ukraine intelligentsia. This silence started to be constructed back then 10 years ago when memory laws were adopted under Poroshenko. According to one of these memory laws, so-called dehumanization law, members of OUN and UPA were recognized as fighters for Ukraine independence. And they really were the fighters for Ukraine independence. But two critical questions are still on the table. What kind of Ukraine state they desired, and it was a authoritarian state, ethnic state. That's why they perpetrated ethnic violence against Jews, against Russians, and against Poles. And the second questions, with what tools? And these tools was this brutal ethnic violence against civilian neighbors, elderly people, civilian kids, against women. And this brutality took lives dozens of their neighbors. So what we are glorifying today, we are claiming that we are protecting freedom and democracy. Ukraine government is claiming that Ukraine is moving toward the family of nation, Europe family of nation, where human rights and human life and human dignity is the most important. So why now you are celebrating Nazi collaborators? Why now, after decades of existence of Ukraine independent state? Why now? And we understand why now, because Ukraine, instead of the Soviet myth, is creating nationalist myth in order to mobilize society on the war against Russia. And we understand that 7 million Ukrainians fought against Nazis nowadays are fallen heroes. They are marked sometimes even as Soviet collaborators, as occupiers, And those Nazi collaborators, 300,000 thousands of them, and only 100,000 were in Ukraine nationalist underground, now are perceived as national heroes? What is that? 73% of Ukrainians voted against this in 2019. And now they're afraid even to raise their voices against this. And nobody is asking them about their opinion because public discussion wasn't organized. The office of the president just told Ukrainians, we will bring this guy to Ukraine. It was just, information. Just public was just informed. No public discussion. No critical, thinking about this. Do we need this Nazi hero on Ukraine's soil? Do we need such hero? What does it mean for our future? What does it mean to present Ukraine? And another issue, which was very striking. Ukraine army nowadays is approximately 1 million people and 120 brigades. Why only one brigade? The 3rd Assault Brigade, which is rooted in Nazi Azov movement, was present there. And among those guys were people with problematic worldview. For example, the guy with the nickname McGregor, who posed with Warsange, Nazi symbol. The guy who is a frontman of the band Sokira Peruna, which has the song 6 million words of lie, which is about Holocaust denial, and all those guys were present in this high, in this state funeral with this top military and state officials. And what is very interesting, the same brigade recently celebrated the anniversary of creation of Waffen-SS Division Galicia, but they remained silent on 8 May, when Ukraine, on the national level, marked the end of the Second World War and mourned the victims of the Nazism. And Ukraine lost approximately 10 million people in the Second World War. Not even a word from this brigade. And this brigade formed a 3rd Army Corps, approximately 50,000 people. They remained silent. But instead, they celebrated Nazi collaborators, Waffen-SS Division Galicia, and they were invited by the office of the president to participate in the state funeral and the state tribute to Nazi collaborator. So it's not just some funeral. It's not just some event. It's a very problematic sign and symptom of memory politics in Ukraine that turn into World War II revisionism, Holocaust distortion, and Nazi apology. And I was very struck by the fact that Germany, which is a guardian of the memory of Nazi atrocities in the Soviet Union, and particularly in Ukraine, Germany sponsors so many monuments in Ukraine, memory sites in Ukraine, remain silent. Not a statement. Not a word. Mainstream German media are not critical even about this. German officials are not critical. Chancellor Merz are silent. Why they see IDF as a far-right neo-Nazi movement, but don't see that Ukraine government is celebrating neo-Nazis and invite them to celebrate Nazi collaborator, to glorify Nazi collaborator openly. What is going on? We should all ask this question. What is going on in Ukraine and where Ukraine is heading with this kind of memory politics?
Yeah, well, I can understand kind of how because the fascist groups in Ukraine, they've always been small, marginal. I mean, it wasn't as if the Ukrainians majority wanted them, but I think they can be used in a very instrumental way, because well, the whole idea that the fascists are liberators, I think it's an interesting development, because I often make the point that the historical closeness of the Ukrainians and the Russians after living in the same state for centuries, I think was, I might be mistaken, but it could have been Solzhenitsyn who referred to it as a double-edged sword, because on one hand, in the East, you find many Ukrainians who essentially say, well, we're brotherly people. Many argue, why do we even have two separate states? Essentially, we're one people, we're all descendants of Kiev and Rus. But then in the Western parts, there's many, and I would add quite reasonably, who argue that, well, this closeness also can diminish our sovereignty. That is, if you're all the same, why do we have our own state? So they can see this history as being a threat to sovereignty. So any anti-Russian narrative, essentially, that presents the Russians as being the inheritors of the Mongols, for example, the Golden Horde, the Asiatics, while the Ukrainians represent the real, Aryan Europeans. That's a good way of solidifying, I guess, a distinctive identity. So I can see the pragmatism of this. I'm not condoning fascist ideology, just to make it clear. But I think also, if you look at why Germany would be quiet, because you pointed out Germany, I think it's important that when the Germans defeated the Russians in the First World War, you had it was ended with the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. It was again represented as Germany liberating the Ukrainians, but in reality, every historian agreed that this was simply taking Ukrainians from being part of the Russian Empire to being a vassal of the Germans. And then, of course, afterwards the Germans were defeated, and then we have Second World War, and we see the Germans yet again. They see all this nationalist, and they think in Ukraine, who wants to have a greater distance from Russia. They see, a tool essentially they can use. So they begin to cooperate with many. You see then a lot among the Ukrainian nationalists, many beginning to become integrated into the fascist ideology. And now I would argue a third time, we see again after the Cold War, that is, our goal was to create a collective hegemon. We're going to unify all of Europe eventually under EU and NATO, either as member or de facto members, except for Russia. So creating a Europe without Russia. This means de-Russifying the continent. And suddenly, I think the fascist groups in Ukraine, they become our natural partners, because they want to de-Russify Ukraine. We want to de-Russify Europe. Or when I say we, I mean our political leaders. So it kind of goes without saying that this, there's a common interest. I'm not saying that the Western leaders have subscribed to Nazi ideology. It's a bit like whitewashing Giuliani in Syria. We can be friends with jihadists. We can be friends with fascists. As long as they serve a goal. So again, I think it's instrumental. But what's your takeaway of the way the Western media has addressed this? Because in Poland, there's outrage because of all the Poles that were killed by Ukrainian fascists during World War II. But I'm looking at the Western European media especially, and there's, crickets. There's nothing there. I read some, I think it was New York Times, when they said, a divisive historical figure about Andrei Milnik, which is a weird way, they can call Hitler divisive as well if they want, but this is what's your takeaway?
Controversial. They also I saw some controversial, they can say, What I can say, so we had this burial of Melnik, and the next day, Zelensky awarded to one military unit this title, Heroes of UPA, Ukraine Insurgent Army. And then Poland was very offended, and we had this series of protests from Polish officials, especially President Nawrocki, Polish President Nawrocki. He said that he will strip Zelensky of this high state honor. This white eagle. Then we had this statement from Prime Minister Tusk. He said that this decision harms the memory of victims of UPA because, according to Polish this Institute of their Institute of National Memory, there were at least 100,000 Polish civilians killed by Ukraine Insurgent Army, UPA, in Eastern Galicia and Volhynia during the Second World War. And today we saw that Lublin City Council, they removed Ukraine flag from their building. And today another Polish official said that Zelensky should make a call to Nawrocki and bring his apologies. So we still have this, outrage from Polish side, because for Polish people, it's a very sensitive topic. And Ukraine side do not want to apologize. And what I noticed that many people in Ukraine, even very liberal people, started to adopt this far-right formula, our land, our heroes. This was formula that we heard on Svoboda Party, these far-right neo-Nazi marches that celebrated Bandera birthday, But now it's a mainstream slogan. For the past 4 years, since 2022, Ukrainians constantly were feeding this narrative. You protect Europe, you protect all of us. And basically, European politicians and Western media, they raise this messiah complex in Ukrainians. And they really believe that they can have these, fascist and Nazi heroes, and it's no one's business. And everyone must just give them money, and they can spend this money for, state bureaus of Nazi collaborators and building these, fancy cemeteries for them and fancy monuments for them. No, it's not. Ukrainians must understand that European values actually and means that they adopt this World War II memory formula about never again. Okay, we can discuss what never again basically means nowadays. Yeah, looking at Gaza, West Bank and all this stuff, and never again for whom, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so we can discuss all this, but you can celebrate neo-Nazis. You can arm neo-Nazis, basically. Yeah, you can celebrate ethnic violence. And Ukraine officials now really, really can't understand that it's not only their business. 10.5 million Ukrainian pensioners are completely dependent on the West. Ukrainian teachers, Ukrainian doctors, Ukrainian children. Everyone in Ukraine is dependent on the West. And nowadays, when Ukraine completely depend on the mercy, I will say, of its Western partners, Zelensky is doing this? I can't understand this. We saw this, we saw these new statements from Hungary, about protection of Hungarian minority. So now we have problems with Hungary, serious problems with Hungary, And Zelensky created more problems now with Poland. And why is problematic? Because Poland is the second country with the biggest number of Ukraine refugees. So the ordinary people may suffer the consequences. I mean, hate crimes, for example. So local people who have ordinary Ukrainians who have nothing to do with Zelensky politics, and his chutzpah, will suffer the consequences in their daily life, may suffer consequences, because we already see the rise of hate crimes in Poland against Ukrainians. We see this. Many people say in Poland, we are fed up with Ukrainians, no more help, no more this, hospitality, no more. So I believe it was very stupid move from Zelensky. When you put Heroes of UPA, on the title, on any title, you need a school and so on and so forth, you just close the discussion. It's a way to celebrate, glorify, to make them, only heroes. It's not about debate. It's not about their complicity in ethnic violence. It's basically the road to punish everyone who criticizes them. That's why, for example, when I was put on this Mиротворец hit list, one of the evidence against me was my academic article about gender-based violence against women perpetrated by the members of OUN and UPA, rape, and other shame-based punishment of women, for example, cutting their hair off for romantic relations with the Red Army officers, for example. They were Ukrainians. Those guys were Ukrainians from Eastern Ukraine, but they were bad Ukrainians because they were Soviets, so they were Russian speaking and they believed in Soviet Ukraine, so they were perceived as enemy men, and local women, local girls were punished by them, by members of OUN and UPA, by cutting their hair off. And back then, 80 years ago, this kind of punishment undermined social standing of those women and their families. They became non-marriageable after that. So it became tragedy for those women, especially in rural areas, in their villages. And this article, and they killed Polish women, for example, or raped them. They killed those women from Eastern Ukraine who were sent to Western Ukraine. And when I published this article, I was punished basically for this article. So every single historian now who is trying to preserve critical thinking about OUN and UPA has no prospect of academic career in Ukraine. It will be stigmatized, it will be stripped of its job, and it will be basically removed from, stripped of any prospects in Ukraine, in this kind of Ukraine. So I believe it's very, very problematic. These kind of developments in Ukraine is very problematic. And it's not about, some specific field of research or some specific academics and historians. It's about a state of society where war criminals and those who perpetrated war crimes against innocent children, women, elderly, are celebrated as heroes, as national heroes. it's very problematic.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Well, before I said there could be some strategic advantage in leaning into the nationalist narratives, as a wartime strategy, and also to, I guess, reorient Ukraine away from Russia. But if I was advising the Ukrainian government, I would say it would also lead to some predictable strategic problems. One, when you dehumanize millions of Ukrainians themselves, this has, you can't really have a cohesive society. And even with the war fighting, it impacts because now there's, all these people who are, either millions who fled the Ukraine or people are in hiding in Ukraine who do not, they don't see necessarily the incentive in fighting, for a government that views them as second-rate citizens and essentially call their own language, their mother tongue to be, make them criminals and traitors. So it's, Arostovich, who, former advisor to Zelensky, he actually made this point. I know he has shifted his position more than once, but I thought this was a sound one. It's, well, the argument on itself, irrespective of who came with it, it is quite reasonable. That is, this was a key mistake. They could have had millions of patriots wanting to defend the homeland, but when the homeland's defined in this extreme nationalist terms, millions of people were will essentially turn their back on it. This is not a strategic move, but also, of course, the second was alienating important partners. Now, I know a lot of Western governments have done their very best to look the other way, but there's still some people who are asking questions. So what are we doing here? Why? We're keeping told in the West that no, well, Zelensky is Jewish. This is all Russian propaganda. But then we get the media reports. We see the fascist symbols adopted by the army. We see both Poland, Israel, both express outrage about these fascist symbols, and reviving the fascist memories. It's hard to. It's hard to explain this. The narrative starts to crack, but how do you think this? How can this go on to such an extent, you think, and still be ignored? Because in Europe, Zelensky can beat everything. He can be caught red-handed in corruption. It doesn't matter. He can purge the political opposition, the media, the Orthodox Church, and still he's hailed as a democratic hero. Let's give him the Peace Prize. How do you make sense of this, though?
I'm in 2022, actually, when the war started, I imposed self-censorship, and I didn't criticize him. I started to criticize in 2023 when I was struck by this, when when Azov rooted Third Assault Brigade organized this exhibition where they recreated photos of the Waffen-SS Division Galicia. And basically they compared themselves with members of Waffen-SS Division Galicia. So it wasn't Kremlin propaganda, but they themselves compared their fighters to those who fought for Nazis, and served Nazi cause. And when I pointed to this fact, I understood that, nobody actually from my colleagues is willing to support me. Nobody, even those who study Holocaust, even those who had Jewish origin, even those in the West, those in the Western academia. And it was very interesting phenomenon for me. They explained to me that it's not the right time to criticize Ukraine government because all these are important. Those talks are very important. But these problems are minor in comparison to Russian aggression, and they must be postponed until Ukraine's victory. And I told them that you will be terrified by the society that you will build by your silence. You will be terrified by this society. And now, couple years later, what we see. We are terrified by this society because Zelensky concentrated more and more power. Ukraine became more authoritarian. Now, Ukraine army became army of the slaves. 90% of men who ended up in the army are caught in the streets by the draft officers. Those who don't comply are severely beaten. And, many people still in the West, they are making reference to some legality. And I explained to them that racial laws were in Germany in 1935 were also legal. And racial segregation in US was legal. And lynching was legal. So it's a very bad idea to justify forced mobilization by the law. And today we see that Azov started from, 1,000 plus people. Now Azov movement have 2 army corps. I was laughing when I was watching this Black Sea Security Forum in Odessa that was last week. And, the chair of one of the session was introducing guests and he said, and now we invite the member of elite brigade. And I was laughing because I was sure that it will be Azov-rooted 3rd Assault Brigade. And I was right. They, they changed the discourse about Azov. And now in this public opinion, it's an elite brigade. The 3rd Assault Brigade, all commanders are from this old Azov. They are radicals with white supremacist views. Now they advocate with very racist and chauvinistic slogans against labor migrants. They are misogynists, they are very racist, they are anti-Semitic, and they still call them elite brigade. So now we have 2 corps formed from Azov movements. And, I really believe that those Western countries, and especially Ukraine neighbors, like Poland, like Hungary, like Romania, like Czech Republic, they must be worried of those developments because Azov has the concept of greater Ukraine. And I encourage all those people who still believe that Azov is really innocent to look at their concept of greater Ukraine and to the map of the greater Ukraine that includes all the neighboring part of the neighboring states. Azov has the imperialist concept, and Ukraine has the most hardened army in the Europe. And I believe that in the future, it's really the great probability that Western countries, NATO countries, will have the problem with Ukraine, not with Russia, but with Ukraine, and with these very radical, but very active and ideologically motivated guys who will try, because, just last week, Azov commanders talked about going to Transnistria, to Pridnestrovia, and help Moldova. Zelensky talked about helping Romania. Yeah. And we don't know what does it mean. Yeah. and Moldova and Romania are talking about joining into one state. And, they are threatening Belarus, for example. Also, we are hearing talks about locating some brigades in Baltic states to protect, Ukraine, in order to protect Ukraine. We are hearing these talks now from high-level top Ukraine commanders. Just listen to them. Just listen what they are talking about, and they are really, really, they have really great military experience, combat experience, and they have a great NATO weapon. Yeah, and in comparison to Polish army and to army of other NATO countries, they have great military combat experience, war experience. So I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic about the future of Ukraine. And the main ideology in Ukraine is ethno-nationalism. It's a very, very dangerous ideology. Very dangerous ideology pushed by Azov, and now it works in turbo mode and supported by Zelensky, because for Zelensky regime relies on Azov. That's why we see that all neo-Nazis in Ukraine, all far-right groups, they support Zelensky. They constantly advocate Zelensky. They constantly write war Zelensky. All corruption scandals, they go to different shows and say, but Zelensky didn't know. He's innocent. He didn't know. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I couldn't believe that I will witness such an alliance between Zelensky office and his inner circle and neo-Nazis and far-right in Ukraine. But this is fact now.
We see a lot of strange grouping comes up. I saw you mentioned the security forum now in Odessa, and I saw also on the guest list there was Reza Pahlavi, who is the monarchist from Iran, that is the ones who want to bring essentially the Shah rule back. It's a very strange mix of people. I was waiting only to see Jolani pop on the list as well. But I agree. I think the idea that can just take this kind of group and use them as an instrument to achieve some strategic objective, it's very dangerous. And as you said, it can corrupt the entire collective consciousness of Ukraine. I mean, if you want to save Ukraine, I don't think putting these people, the banderas, to essentially define the Ukrainian soul, if you will, that this is, you would might end up killing it. So it's and also, if you look in Germany during World War I, they sent Lenin in to the Russian Empire because they hoped that
Exactly.
if you have a communist revolution, this would take them out of World War I. Well, now you have Bolsheviks ruling Russia for the next few decades. Same as supporting Bin Laden to fight the Soviets. Then later on, then you have the jihadists, global terror. So it's you can see we're sowing problems for the future here, but it's very difficult to even criticize Nazis anymore, even in Western Europe, because in political propaganda, you want to often divide everything into two simple binaries. That is, you're supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the horrors it has caused, or you're supporting Ukraine by not criticizing it. So if you criticize the celebration of fascist groups, then you're undermining the standing of Ukraine, which means then you're taking Russia's side. If you're showing some empathy towards, or even reporting on the Ukrainians which are dragged out of their homes, the busification sent to the front to die, well, then you're also taking Russia's side. If you point to the fact that majority of Ukrainians want negotiations, indeed, that in 2019 as well, the majority voted for peace, well, then you're also taking Russia's side, because this is taking credibility away from the government. So, what's considered pro-Ukrainian now in Europe is essentially, to ignore the will of the Ukrainians and just, don't boycott the diplomacy, just send more weapons in and fight to the last Ukrainian. It's kind of a gruesome thing. And even in this country, I'm in Norway, and this politician is the head of the Committee on Foreign and Defense Affairs in Parliament. He goes to Ukraine, he takes picture with Bilecki, and then posted on his, this is the guy who's, before the Russian invasion, you had British media, all media reporting quotes from him that he said the mission of Ukraine is to lead the white race against the Jews and the Untermensch, like there's no way you can whitewash these comments. They've done their best. But also, when also then greeting, of course, Azov members with, their, with all their logo symbols on in the parliament. And this is considered to be pro-Ukrainian. I mean, I think it's shameful for Norway and shameful for Ukraine. These people don't represent us in any way. But Boris Johnson did the same, waving the big Azov flag in the British Parliament. I mean, our forefathers must be spinning in their graves. This is just, And also, it doesn't, I mean, if it did something at least to help Ukraine, that would be one thing. But imagine if you're sitting in Moscow now and you see this, you're essentially now thinking, well, all this historical Russian territories, all the millions of Russians who now, live in Ukraine, the social contract has been broken. They're not allowed to represent them anymore. We'll take all the territory back. I mean, at least when the war began, there was a more modest rhetoric from Moscow. These days, they refer to Ukraine as country 404, so-called Ukraine. Is becoming quite aggressive, failing to even recognize not just the government but the legitimacy of Ukraine as a country. This is a disaster. Which it should be toned down. Instead, we're just encouraging the worst instincts, which will get the worst possible reactions. It's hard to understand where this is going. But I guess, that's my last question. How sustainable do you think this is? Because, I can understand a lot of Ukrainians get caught up. They're invaded. They lost a lot of men, territories lost, infrastructure being destroyed. I guess I can understand the logic that, with the war being the main priority, all these other things, we push it aside. We'll deal with it later. At least this is the sentiment, I think, among the Western political class. But how durable do you think this is? Do you see any cracks?
Western media. So nowadays, Zelensky recently told Ukraine media that probably we can expect that until the end of this year, the war will end. But in reality, Western media published information based on their sources that Zelensky is preparing for 2 and 3 more years of war. So basically, this narrative about half a year of war is for Ukraine audience, only for Ukraine audience. It's about, please wait a couple more months. Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. We will deal with this. We will get money. We will reform draft office centers. They will be more polite. They will ask your husband politely to go to this van, and to go to the infantry, But it's all sound like, like fairy tales. And more people in Ukraine, they are losing hope. I'm talking to all my relatives in Ukraine, and it's like a never-ending nightmare. And what we see that those people who now are trying to escape from Ukraine are mostly men, not even women, but men. Because nowadays the main objective for people is to survive, and for men to survive this war is getting, the task on. It just, you can't do this because those hunters are everywhere, in the bus stops, in the street, in gyms, in hospitals, everywhere. You go, to grocery stores and you are kidnapped. You go to your dentist and you are kidnapped. You are not safe anywhere. And Ukraine men are most vulnerable. We have this feminist mantra that women and children are more vulnerable in the war. But nowadays we observe how men are vulnerable. Their bodily integrity is completely violated. When we see this harsh scene, how they are beaten, how they are brutalized, it's just unbelievable. And nobody asked them, do you want to die for this corrupt state? That's why I have no hope Ukraine is turning into private military company of the West. And the return to this Black Sea Security Forum, when I listened to Senator Kelly and Blumenthal, they want to fight. They still feeding Ukrainians with these, fairy tales about, you are close to the victory. Just keep going. And I listened to Kellogg, and he's talking about these enormous, sufferings of Russia and losses of Russia, and nothing about Ukraine losses. Nothing about, and I'm tracing losses of my city and Lviv region every single day. And every single day, 5 names, 6 names, up to 8 names every single day. And nobody count them. They are just numbers. And for Kellogg, Kelly, Blumenthal, and others neocons who advocate the interests of merchants of death and arms sellers, arms producers, those people don't exist. They are just numbers. And they even don't dare to name these numbers. They don't even talk about these numbers. They never mentioned even these numbers because those numbers are also terrifying. The losses of Ukraine. They never talk about deserters. Even official numbers, 300,000 of deserters and those who went AWOL. This is huge numbers. Nobody is talking about them on these security forums. Nobody is talking about the price. Nobody is talking that Zelensky can protect civilians from drones attacks and from bombs attacks. Nobody is talking about that. And nobody is talking that Ukraine is also targeting civilians like it was in Starobelsk. And those students were Ukrainians, born in Ukraine and raised in Ukraine. And now in Ukraine, military discourse, media discourse, they are called collaborators. Just collaborators who are not deserving our pity. They are just collateral damage. And Mиротворец hit website even put teachers of the Starobelsk college, several teachers on their website, accusing them of collaboration with Russia. So basically, Ukraine people are raised in this hatred even towards their own people. So when I hear this, these words from Zelensky, we will not leave our people. We will not leave Donbass because they are our people. No, it has nothing to do with Donbass, and it has nothing to do with the people. He just don't want war to stop, because stopping war for him means losing the power. and losing the source of profit for him and his inner circle. So I'm not optimistic about Ukraine, and I'm very concerned about this society that Ukraine is building. This highly militarized society, ethno-nationalistic society, very chauvinistic society, full of hate and full of censorship. I don't want, this kind of future for Ukrainian children. That's why I took my child, and every single day I'm happy that I save my child from this. Because when I see all these developments, I'm just, when I see Azov guys Azov use Centuria in Ukrainian public schools, and they are allowed to all these schools, and these far-right organizations, performing lessons of courage in Ukrainian public schools with all these, hate symbols. I'm just terrified. What are you doing, guys? And all this so normalized in Ukraine nowadays. I feel very sorry. It's like hell nowadays. Yeah.
The problem is when the war is over as well, because of this new identity they're trying to create, many,
Yeah.
as yourself, will probably not come back. And it's going to be very hard to rebuild if the people don't actually come back. So what kind of country one is going to create? It's not, we'll deal with this later. I think it's a big problem, but for me, always the main frustration is, again, as I mentioned before, this simple binary, you're pro-Ukrainian or you're pro-Russian. That's all. And this essentially makes any discussion, or anyone is immune to criticism, because you're not allowed to be pro-Russian. And apparently, if you're worried about Ukrainians being sent to their deaths, that means you're cheering for the invasion. There's no middle ground. But I'm thinking back. For example, in March of 2014, Henry Kissinger, he wrote an article saying that, we should give up this right after Russia took Crimea. We should give up this idea of, making Ukraine a front line either of the West against Russia or Russia against the West. The only way Ukraine can, remain intact and not destroyed is if it becomes a bridge, not a front line. This today would be considered anti-Ukrainian, same as if you argue, what best way to end this war is to agree for the NATO countries to agree a security arrangement with Russia in which we stop, for example, NATO expansion, essentially remove Ukraine from the front lines of a divided Europe, and this way we can save that nation. This would also be considered now to be pro-Russian. And even people like you mentioned Keith Kellogg before, he had this General Keith Kellogg, who was, again, became this envoy. He was giving this speech, you've probably seen it, where he argued that, this is just the top of professionalism. What we're doing now is, we're having Ukrainians to fight Russia, that we can weaken Russia, and then we can focus our resources on confronting China. So, the Ukrainians are, meat we can throw at the Russians. And I made a comment about this, and he tweeted me back saying, well, this is, Sun Tzu stuff. So which is very weird. But anyways, my point is, he's considered pro-Ukrainian. Why? Because he openly said, we can use the Ukrainians to knock out Russia from the ranks of great powers, which allows us to focus on Russia. Why is this pro-Ukrainian? The only logic in this is that it weakens Russia. So if it's bad for Russia, it's good for Ukraine. And I looked up this. Here have this article from 2023, because it's in the Washington Post. It was after this disastrous counteroffensive by Ukraine. Again, they got slaughtered when they went down in Zaporizhia. Just a lot of men perished. And yeah, this is a direct quote from Washington Post. It said, again, after the horrible counteroffensive, it says, yeah, the West's most reckless antagonist has been rocked. NATO has grown much stronger with the addition of Sweden and Finland. Germany has weaned itself off dependence from Russian energy and in many ways rediscovered its sense of values. NATO squabbles make headline, but overall it's been a triumphal summer for the alliance. And it goes on saying that this as the last 18 months have been a windfall. It's been a great success, except of course for all the dead Ukrainians, the destruction of the country. And but again, this is how pro-Ukrainian rhetoric is these days.
Yeah.
And if you criticize this, saying then they can't win, why are we continuing to do this? Well, that's a Russian pro-Russian argument, and you're a traitor. It's
Yeah.
I have never seen political propaganda like this in my lifetime. It's quite extraordinary. But
Yeah.
anyways, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I just hope that this war will end, because too much suffering, you know. And I hope that, show like yours and other will undermine this mainstream discourse, hawkish discourse in the West that keep feeding this war and present this as pro-Ukraine, actually. Yeah. Because I'm and many people in Ukraine are tired of this. Yeah. Let's hope for the better. Yeah.
I agree. I guess last example which could have been made was when the head of German intelligence made a point that we should keep this war going for another 5 years so we can prepare ourselves for conflict with Russia. So this is yet another pro-Ukrainian statement. We need them to go to the front lines another 5 years so we can prepare ourselves. It's horrible. This is I can't believe it's gone this far, and probably will go even further if it continues to go on. But yeah, like you, I hope this war comes to a quick end, and too much suffering already. Anyways, on this very sad topic, nonetheless, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Thank you so much.